Welcome to the Erie Drift Plains Native Plant Summit. This gathering was created to share knowledge, spark curiosity, and connect people who care about native plants and the places they live. Each summit session brings a different perspective, but all are rooted in the same idea that small, thoughtful actions, when taken together, can support healthier landscapes and stronger communities. For our next session, we are joined by Kedzierski, Native Plant Material Specialist at Ernst Conservation Seeds, where he's worked since 2004. Greg brings over 2 decades of experience in native seed selection, seed sourcing, and meadow establishment. In this summit session, he'll walk us through exactly what it takes to establish a successful native meadow, from site preparation to species selection. Hi, Greg. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Can you start by telling me a little bit about yourself, how you were even involved in native plants?
I went to Penn State Barron. I got into bio-BD, which was basically basic biology. And then I got a summer job working at the Grape Research Station in Northeast. So I worked there. I returned to college after I was in the military. So I worked there like 5 years in the summer. And then I eventually moved to Richmond, Virginia. And I worked for the USDA, and then I worked for the Seed Lab of Virginia. And that's kind of where I learned about native seed, because in a seed lab, we test seeds. So we test them for germination, purity, truth to variety, the whole 9 yards. And we would get these mixes, Ernst, Fairy Moon, all these different mixes. And we'd have to separate them out, separate all the native seeds. And then I had to be able to identify native seeds, like 500 different kind of native seeds almost. And that's how I really first got into it. And then I eventually started working for Ernst Conservation Seed Company. So I've been here almost 23 years now, and I've really been into the natives heavy, very heavy.
When was your first native pollinator meadow that you planted?
That would have been probably within the first year I was working at Ernst.
Nice.
So yeah, it was just like one of those things. It actually wasn't one that I planted personally. It was one that I was asked, can I come out to their site and can I evaluate it for them and look at it and give them ideas and tell them what they need to know. The first one I really planted was in my backyard in Meadow here. And it was small. It was maybe 6 feet wide by about 12 feet long. And that was the first one. And then I eventually kind of put in more in my yard. I do like my grass for just reasons of walking and using the yard, but I've gone to one area that's no mow at all. I haven't mowed it in 6 years. I have other areas where I planted native shrubs and put in pollinator gardens. So I've taken an acre and probably have about almost a half an acre of native, whether it's shrub species, tree species, and or forbs and grasses.
I love that. Can you define a meadow for me? I think like this big lopping field.
Yeah, usually that's really what it is. Like traditional meadow, that's it. It's basically a big field, whether it's a wet meadow, a dry meadow, a shady, or not a shady meadow, because really, I don't really think there's shady meadows, but partially shaded meadows like a savanna. And basically all it is just an accumulation of native forbs and grasses and sedges and rushes and things like that are endemic to the area that you're in, whether it's northwestern Pennsylvania, Virginia, Maryland, or wherever.
Okay, so what drew you to meadows specifically? For me, I think it'd be just like, I want to stop mowing my grass. But what drew you?
As part of my work, that's one big thing. And it really got me interested. I actually took a trip down to Jennings Prairie to see that. And that's kind of really was one of the really first high quality native endemic that was there meadows that I had seen, but with both flowering species and native grass species. And that's kind of what drew me into like, okay, I really got to do a little bit more research into this. How am I going to be able to do this, not only myself, but for my job also, to help our customers, whoever I've talked to, these things in. It's biodiversity. It's just the meadow itself, tranquil, pretty, aesthetic. That's what really drew me into meadow. Woods are fine. Spring ephemerals are fine. Trees are great, but you find a wet meadow or a dry meadow and the flowers and these grasses. And that's what really drew me in. Plus everything, ecologically that goes along with it, everything that they service, whether it's the pollinators that go along with it or, the animals, the mammals that use it or the birds that use it, because a lot of birds use grass meadows as places for nesting and so on. So that's really what drew me into more of the meadow side of things.
So really a holistic look at it.
Yeah, that's really about it. I mean, that just goes along with the job that I do because everyone now, when I started in the use of native seeds, it was all in restoration. So it was, somebody impacted wetlands, somebody finished a mineland, someone's doing a roadside projects, something like that, a gas pipeline or whatever it was. It was more of just, okay, let's try to get that back to a semblance of what native used to be. Whereas, going through the meadow, that's where you can really make these things shine. So, and one other thing is, like when I started, people weren't really putting these in the landscape. I mean, there were people doing it, but they tended to be higher end projects. But now it's really caught on, and also that's why I've really kind of zeroed in on meadows.
I love it. Yeah, you're the native plant guy everyone always tells me to talk to.
Thank you.
So from your experience, what kind of insects and wildlife, besides just general birds and bees, show up first when you start to establish a meadow?
I mean, I would say it's the butterflies, the skippers, the moths, the wasps, the bees, the bee mimics. It's almost within the first year that they start really coming in. Because, usually when I design a meadow, I like to put in some flowering species that will flower within the first year. And those are usually the first things that really start showing up. And then even in the first year, you also do get some mammals. So you get rabbits, you'll start getting moles, voles, things like that. All kinds of small little mammals start really moving in because it's just, even in urban areas, it just makes habitat and they're drawn right to it. So moths, you get a lot of moths too.
Moths are something that most of us don't consider. We always talk about the bees and the butterflies because they're super pretty, but a lot of us don't consider moths being pollinators as well. So I love that you brought them up.
I'll give you an example. A few years back, just threw some seed down in my grass. It was a common milkweed. I didn't really think that it would take off because I didn't really prep anything. And probably 3 years into it, one evening in the summertime, it was hot. We had the back door open. I could just smell, they were kind of off gassing, they were really fragrant. It was just perfect. I flipped on the backlight and above the milkweed were just tons of moths flying. And then above that, swooping in and out, were bats. And that's what it's all about to me. So it's really creating that habitat. But yeah, that's just an example that, moths that come in, you don't see them usually. They're kind of nighttime creatures, but yeah, it was just one of those things. I was like, holy cow, so.
I love it. That sounds like it was one of your aha moments after you built your meadow.
Yeah, it was.
What is the first thing someone should consider before they start planting a pollinator meadow?
So the first thing I usually will tell people, this is something that if you're going to do it, it's not a 1-year thing. This is an ongoing thing that you will be taken care of until you take it out. So it's not one of these things you just plant and forget. That there will be ongoing maintenance from before you plant that seed till you take it out. And then I also really tell people before they start, don't start too big because of the maintenance and the amount of work.
Once we know about how big we want it and we don't make it too big, maybe some of us who are exuberant scale back. What's our first step to starting planting a meadow?
Yeah. So this is my technique, but there are other techniques and I'll kind of go through some of the different techniques. If you're doing a lawn to meadow, and that's probably one of the biggest things out there right now, especially if you're urban, suburban, my first step is mark it out, delineate it, right? No matter how big or small it is, delineate it. I like to use spray paint. I spray paint the shape that I want. Think of the shape that you want, whether it's a square, you have to make it kind of rectangular or oblong, you want an oval, whatever. That way you know what it is. Then I use herbicide, right? I use glyphosate. I will spray it down with glyphosate, wait, a week or so, and I scalp mow it. Lower the deck right to the surface of the soil and just scalp mow all that dying and dead grass off. Then you just wait about a month, whatever germinates, because you've daylighted all that soil. Spray it again. Same thing. If you have to scalp mow it, scalp mow it. You can actually aerify the soil a little bit to bring some more of the weed seeds that are in the soil profile up, and then just wait again and glyphosate it again. After that second or third glyphosate, depending on how clean your seed bed is, that's when you can seed. And normal seeding times are usually fall or spring. So think about your prep. That's another thing I also say. Don't just jump into this thinking you're going to be able to do this, in a weekend without any prep. So a couple other ways to do it would be put down some black plastic or some clear plastic. Make sure you tuck it into the soil. You want to try to heat that soil up to kill all the weed seeds in there, anything that's growing. And then the longer you leave that on, you could leave that on 2 seasons. Hopefully that will be enough. And then you would directly plant into that. Another thing you could do is, and this is, I really recommend to people who have suburban or urban yards, smaller, they're not going to start big or medium, do it by plug planting, right? It's the simplest, it's the biggest bang for your buck and the quickest bang for your buck. And it's fairly simple. You could basically take some cardboard, the lasagna method, just cardboard the area down, put a little bit of, maybe you could put bark mulch down or mushroom compost or good compost, and then just dibble holes through it where you want to put your plants in, 1 foot on center or 6 inches on center. Especially with a nice plug, I always recommend the bigger plugs, not the smaller ones. And your establishment will almost be instantaneous. Within a year, everything should be almost fully grown and well flowering.
That's probably what we've done. I buy plants whenever I want and I just put them in the ground. And then I don't really care for them beyond that because I expect them to take off. So thinking ahead though, how do you prevent weeds from getting into it? How do you know what's a weed and what's a new flower that's being established if you're using a seed method instead of plugs?
That's where, if you are going to go the seed method, that's where this is like a long-term thing. Be proactive, not react. Because if you react after everything's germinated or before things germinate, you're not out there looking at it. And I mean like every week, that's when you're going to get behind the ball. Right? Because weeds want to grow quickly, they germinate very fast, and they grow very fast, and then they produce prodigious amounts of seed. So if you're not out there like proactively checking your site, looking at what's growing, there's a lot of resources now out there on the internet. And if you have an iPhone where you can take a picture of a newly germinated plant and almost get an instantaneous, accurate identification of it. And that's why I say start small, because then you have to figure out how you want to weed that out of there. Do you want to go in there and just pull it? Do you want to use another method, or do you just want to mow it? And that's one of the maintenance techniques for new meadows. If they are weedy, you can just mow it down to about 4 inches, 5 inches. Basically, what you're really trying to do is, most weeds are annuals or biennials. So if you forestall that first year of seed reproduction on it, they're pretty much out of the game the following year or the next year. And you just got to keep up on that till you really realize, okay, I don't have any teasel growing. I don't have any thistle. Maybe this carrot or that, I can live with that. Maybe I'll pull it before it sets seeds. Always pull your weeds before they set seeds. Just look at some of the online resources and figure out what the weeds are.
Is there any benefit to just overseeding a lawn to create a meadow and then just doing the whole mowing approach that you just talked about?
If I was going to do that, I would start by scalp mowing that lawn. Cool season grasses are probably the hardest thing to get natives established in, because especially like our areas where there are more cooler times of the year than there are these warmer periods, cool season grass take off and will smother a native planting out very quickly. It takes a lot of work to do it that method. If you were going to go that method, it's probably 5 times more involved in what you're going to have to do to continue to keep that grass low, to get things established. I would use some pretty aggressive natives, and then I would think about plug planting it, also supplementing with plugs all the time. I don't really think you could kill off the cool season grasses with that method. I just don't think it's possible. I mean, I stopped mowing sections of my yard, and it's been 6 years now, and it's probably 10,000 square feet of an area. And I'm just starting to really get good monsters growing here there, and some goldenrods and a few other things, some milkweeds. But other than that, I'm not really getting any of the other natives that I try to kind of just broadcast or whatever in there. A few beard tongue every now and then will make it through, but the grass, you have to have some pretty aggressive natives to do it that way.
We do have sections of our yard that we don't mow. And the only things that have come up are like those really tall, aggressive ones like ironweed, asters, and goldenrod.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, if your lawn is drier, you may not get some of those other aggressive species coming in that will be able to tolerate not only the grasses coming up, but also the dry periods. So you'd really want to think of the species that you're going to use and what your location is in your yard.
So let's move into that. How do we choose what species we want to plant in a meadow?
So I'm not sure. I'm just one of those kind of free-form people. When I'm doing it on my own property, I say c'est la vie and go ahead, plant what you like. You know what I mean? I love to just, if I can get it by seed or something or by plug, I'll go ahead and try to grow it. If you're more you want to be ecologically correct, or you want to have that habitat more what is growing endemically to your area, I would start by really trying to look at some resources from your area, then start looking in your resources whether you can get it by seed and or by plug. So, and there's a lot of historical data out there.
I was just going to ask if there was so there's no perfect, you start with these types of seeds at this ratio. That's just overcomplicating it.
I think that's overcomplicating it, especially if you wanted to do a historical native meadow to your area, and you would really have to do all that research. And you could figure out, I've rarely ever seen anywhere that gives you density, like plant density. I know there's data coming out now, but I've never really seen where someone's kicked through like a northwestern PA meadow or something like that. So there's this amount of, path rush, and there's this amount of, blue vervain, this, that, any other thing, or blue lobelia or whatever's growing there. It's almost kind of guesstimation, So you would have to do the research for it. I always go a little higher on the seeding rate, just because it always makes a better meadow.
We don't need to worry about adding a seed that could potentially outcompete other seeds. They're all just kind of balanced when they grow in.
I look at it this way. The minute you put them in the ground, succession start across the whole site, whether it's in a lawn or whether it's, in a restoration or a habitat. You put it in and kind of just let the plants themselves fight it out, outcompete themselves, because you will get plants growing, you'll get beard tongue growing here, but you'll get lobelia over there, and you'll get some healing anthus over there, and this, that, and the other thing. But yeah, it really is up to the plant, I think.
Gotta let nature do its thing.
Yeah, I think where people have done these fantastical, matter of fact, I have one on my desk right now, a fantastical meadow broken down into legitimately hundreds of these little strips of plantings of single species, multiple species, truthfully, that they don't work out the way they think they're going to work out. It's, Mother Nature takes over and boom. Unless it's something like super aggressive, like top plant, that's going to grow 6 feet tall. It's going to shoot everything out. It's just going to boss everything out of the way. I think species just work themselves in and out. So, and you'll see that change across the meadow. Once it's established, people change anyways over the years.
What are some common mistakes you see people make at the beginning, besides choosing too large of an area to start with?
I think it's more of like not knowing that they have to maintain it as much. Choosing too many species. For me, if it's small, if it's urban, suburban, I like to pick 8 to 16 species. Aesthetically, it works well in a smaller area. It looks good. It's manageable. You kind of know what almost all the species are that's growing in, so you can do your research, what one of these species looks like, whether it's a rosin reed or a monarda, what they look like when they're growing. I think that they need to bury the seed. I've had a lot of meadows where people plant it and then top dress it with, 2 or 3 inches of soil, whereas most of these species have evolved over time to almost germinate right on the soil surface. Or what you really want to do is get it and have that seed set maybe a 1/4 inch in the soil profile, not much deeper than that, because a lot of them are super small seed and they don't germinate through an inch soil. What else? I always tell people to temper their expectation. You plant, but if you don't see that flowering within the first year, oh my gosh, it's not working, then mow it out, right? Where these things are like 2, 3, 4 year kind of investments before you really see most of the flowering species really coming on and maturing and showing the showiness that they really can do. So it's that not waiting. They really need to temper their expectation. First year, you may have 1 or 2 species flower. You might be able to see if you put native grasses in some of the setting seed or something like that. Second year, you're going to see more coming on as things mature. Third year, really, in a meadow is when it's really starting to mature.
Based on the questions I have for you, it sounds like I try to overcomplicate it. But is there like an appropriate ratio of grass to flowering plants that you should have in a meadow?
About 20 years ago, I went to like the Meadow Prairie Conference. It was like in the Midwest, Oklahoma or somewhere like that. And I was new to this, and I started asking people there. These are people who were managing prairie remnants and more things in the Midwest. And they were like, why? No, because it's really based off of the location. It's based off of the moisture. It's based off of what was originally there. But I think what we try to do as a seed company is do, if you're doing a forb heavy meadow, you want 60 to 70% forbs with about 30% grasses. And you can do diverse grass, warm seasons, things like that. You can mix them in Virginia Wild Rise or whatever you want to put in there. Whereas if you were doing more of a grass, traditional prairie, you would probably throw in 60% grasses, 40 forbs or something like that. I've never really seen, someone say 50-50, 70-30 or whatever. I'm sure there's somewhere out there someone's going to say, oh, well, no. But I think it's
kind of what you want for the area.
To be, yeah, exactly.
So we talked through maintenance while you're establishing a meadow and removing those weeds as they come up and that kind of stuff. Do you have to water it? Do you just let nature do its thing?
If it is in your yard, urban, suburban, you can always water it. It won't hurt it, especially through a dry period. Especially, if you're going into a spring planting and you're kind of late, you're hitting that late May, mid-June, going into July, you can water it because you have the ability to do it. Mainly, people just put it down and say, let it go. And I recently helped them put a meadow on Allegheny College right next to their environmental building. And we did it, it was mid-July, and we didn't really supplement water at all. And I was really surprised. It came out beautiful. Like the germ was great. It germed right through all that heat, established very well. I think right now, actually, there's almost like 32 species growing it. So
Nice.
yeah, if you have the ability to do it if you need to. But most projects, people usually don't water it. High visibility projects, sometimes we'll write that into the spec where it does need to be kind of watered, but most of the time they can kind of take care of themselves.
My kind of gardening. So what does maintenance look like after it's established? Or is there no maintenance after your meadow's established?
That really depends on your weed load. So if you have continual weed problems, really it's pulling weeds and or wanting maintenance mow. If you don't have any weeds at your first year of establishment or down the line, you don't need to mow it. Just allow it to grow. That's why I always say be proactive and not reactive.
That makes a lot of sense.
That's it.
A lot of people end up with quote unquote messy yards during meadow establishment. Do you have any thoughts on that? How we can make it look less messy, how we can reframe messy?
I think it's more going to be reframing it because they are messy. No ifs, ands, or buts. It's not traditional gardening in a sense. You have lots of plants that will grow tall, lots of lodging, lots of flowering throughout the season. I usually try to design a meadow where, you have flowering in the spring, summer, fall, like that. So you'll have dead flowers, you'll have seed pods coming on. It's reframing that. It's changing the narrative that, hey, yeah, it looks messy, but it really isn't messy because it's more ecologically friendly to everything that's out there. It's helping the bumblebees or the monarchs or whatever you're into get that establishment, whether it's something that they can use as a food source or a habitat source or a source for overwintering. It's always going to have that kind of outer boundsy look. You can design these things to be more aesthetically pleasing, by choosing species that are almost all the same height, that kind of flower closer together. But then again, you do need a little bit of that ability for everything to use it, whether it's for food or habitat or overwintering. And then that also goes into the maintenance. So do you mow it in the spring? Do you mow it, before green up? Do you mow off all that dead stuff that has died over the winter? Or do you leave that and allow things to germinate or grow back up through it? Those are calls that you have to make depending on what you're doing this for. I tend to leave things just the way they are. If it's really high visibility, I tell them to mow it late in the spring when the temperature is about 55 degrees for a week or so. Most things at that point are kind of active and leaving because a lot of things overwinter in the stems or rolled up in the leaves or tucked in, in some of those clumps. So
You've established several meadows. Have you run into any issues with policy or local governments having issues with natives because they are quote unquote messy?
I think that is kind of changing on a wider scale. Where you really see a lot of it is like HOAs, homeowners associations. They don't want to see it. They don't want it messy. They want that perfect lawn. But they do allow, pollinator plantings. If it's up near your house or in your backyard where people can't see it, you can put in these little pocket meadows or whatever. Almost all the urban and suburban landscaping that I see now has some component of native plantings in it, for good or for bad, because as I feel, and I've seen it over the years, sometimes putting in a meadow isn't the right thing. Maybe you want to use a single species, or maybe you just want to use plug plantings or massed potted plantings, because sometimes they just don't fit. They don't work, whether it's too hot in the area, whether it's too dry, whether there's too much urban traffic, the weed pressure on these things becomes so much where the planting might look good in 1 year. The next year, it's nothing but teasel, thistle, and mugwort or something like that. I think it's becoming more popular, but also I think people really kind of need to say, meadow might work well there, but maybe it might not. So that's just my personal opinion.
That makes sense. So how can pollinator meadows help spark broader community engagement? Is it just they're messy, so we talk about them more?
No. Actually, I just did one up in Erie with some master gardeners, some master watershed stewards. And it was on a piece of property for the Erie Water Authority. I had tried to start a native group here in Northwestern PA a couple of years ago. And it was one of the members. And she loved the idea of natives, got to be used everywhere. She kept pushing. She's like, will you come up and speak to these people? And I'm like, sure. And she said, I have it set. They're going to come out. And can you come and talk to them? And sure enough, I went up to Erie, and it was on a piece of water authority property that they had been mowing, probably 4 acres. And they're mowing it twice a week, keep it, lawn, looking like lawn. And basically, our thought was start small. It's in a neighborhood. We can use it as kind of a focal point for the neighborhood. Hey, they're not mowing that. I mean, what are they doing over there? We planted it. We put down the seed, did a little bit of maintenance. I put up signage. I always like to use signage because it informs people. It lets people know what's going to happen. And explain what a meadow is, that it's going to attract native bees and pollinators. This one was pretty aesthetic. So it's kind of like, looks nice. We can go. I see people now use it. They kind of buy into it. And I've seen people there when I pull up, kind of looking at it, pulling the trash out of it, kind of like, what's a weed? They'll ask me, what's a weed? What's that you looking for? So I use it as a focal point, kind of a meeting place. Hopefully.
I love that it leads to something bigger. It's very enjoyable.
Exactly. Yep.
So how can groups like Wild Ones chapters support and advocate for more meadows locally? Tell me what to do.
Be an advocate. Go to the city meetings, right? City has lots and lots of vacant and or property that they own that they mow. So if you can kind of say, hey, look, I have a group or I have a neighborhood that I'm interested in, and you guys own this piece of property, and you guys are mowing it twice a week, every week, all through the summer, spring, and fall. How about we put in, an area, and I'll tell you what, they're kind of a bit into that because they don't have the money anymore for a lot of this stuff. So the more they can reduce their costs of maintenance, and if you say, hey, look, we'll take care of it, we're advocating for it, we'll kind of take it on for the next 3 or 4 years or however long you want to do this. And people are buying into it. Cities are buying into it. Municipalities are buying into it.
I'm excited. I'm going to take that and run with it.
It's a good thing.
What keeps you excited about your work year after year, whether it's your personal native meadow plantings or your work at Ernst?
It's changing, the change in attitude, the change in aesthetic, the changing of people's thoughts on it doesn't need to be perfectly manicured anymore. It can look a little wild and woolly and very aesthetic and become part of the neighborhood or a new piece of habitat or helping a park lower their maintenance costs so they could put that money somewhere else within the park or whatever. Yeah, it's stuff like that that really keeps me going. And then it's seeing on the work side of things, it's seeing how it's growing, and not only plant-wise, but also everyone getting into all this pollinator stuff. Yeah, that's what it's really about. It's creating that habitat for the bee, the bumblebees. And when I talk about bees, honeybees are great, but it's more the native bees. It's all the pollinators that go with it, that kind of stuff. That's what really keeps me going and helping people and teaching them so that they can learn to do this themselves. That's what kind of keeps me going. As far as in my backyard, I just love planting all kinds of things. I have like 30 or 40 native trees and shrubs, and tons of form. It's just, experimenting, trying new things.
I think that's one of the things I love most about native plants is I can experiment, and if something doesn't work, I just try something else.
That's it. You can just kind of boom, if it doesn't work, you just mow it out or whatever you're going to do. Oh, if it really looks good, you can just expand it. You can take some of the seeds from the plant, use them that way, or you can divide them up or, whatever you're going to do.
If someone watching the summit takes just one small step towards planting a meadow or becoming involved in a project to plant a meadow if they don't have the space, what would you hope that step is?
Just think about it, and take that first step forward, whether it's getting a brown-eyed Susan potted plant and just putting it into your garden be the first step, or taking a cutting of the native willow and sticking it in the ground and hopefully watching it root grow, or one of the dogwoods or something like that, and just go from there. It's always about learning. It's always about moving forward. And along with that comes all the pollinators with them, and just seeing all that, especially the birds. They're using that right now in this super cold temperature here we're having in northwestern Pennsylvania with all the snow that we have. Those birds go right into my silky dogwood bushes. They go into my bud bushes. They go into the clumps of gray dogwood or whatever, the spice bush that I have there. They're eating either the seeds or they're using that as kind of a windbreak, and they just clump up in there. And then it's everything else that I see. I see all the little nests in there, things like that. Just take that first step and it just grows and grows and grows.
One of my favorite things about winter is seeing the birds split from all of the seed heads in my front yard.
Yeah, that's one thing that I like. But unfortunately, we were talking earlier about policies, municipalities, and rules and regulations. Well, I had put in the front of my yard, I put in a beautiful pollinated garden, probably about 15, 20 feet wide, probably 100 feet long, almost. Unfortunately, they said it was a little too close to the road, was kind of a visual blow. So I had to mow it, or they were going to fine me $400. So I did have to mow it. But going back to allowing that to grow and then keeping those seed heads there, and that's what I love seeing too. They're always down in there, whether it's they're getting an insect or they're getting a seed head or a single seed or something. The wildlife is fantastic seeing this. So.
Absolutely. And then I have 3 rapid fire questions. You ready?
Sure.
Favorite native plant for a meadow?
Favorite plant for a meadow? I like blue lobelia. It's real easy to grow. I also like rattlesnake master. It's kind of like one of these odd ones that you don't see a lot.
Most surprising pollinator.
I really like the hummingbird moss. I thought I had a rusty patch bumblebee, but when I sent it to the bee expert at Allegheny, she was like, no, I'm not really sure. I don't think it is, so we can't call it that, but I thought it was. So
personal win for you. We'll call it a rusty patch bumblebee. And then one myth about pollinator meadows that you would love to see retired and not spoken of again.
That this is easy and there's no maintenance to it. I hate to say that because there's a lot of information on the internet right now. Everybody now is an expert in this. And, just sprinkle the seed and know that, this, that. Take the time to do it. Put the amount of time that you need into it, and you will get that success. And then this is kind of like one of those things that it's not a first year thing, it's a forever thing.
So that's all I had for you. My partner's probably going to hate the amount of plants and seeds I buy for this spring.
That's it too. It's fairly expensive. That's why I do like to start by plug. But seeing I am a seed person, I really know how to do it well. But yeah, if you're a newbie just starting out, buy plugs, do potted material. It's a lot easier. Work your way up to planting a meadow by seed and just enjoy the journey.
I love it. Sounds great. Thank you so much for your time today. I appreciated you chatting with us.
Have a good day.
Thank you so much for spending this time with us and for being a part of this growing conversation. We hope this summit session leaves you feeling a little bit more connected to native plants, to place, and to the community working right alongside you.